Braving the bitter cold, I traveled more than 700 miles back to the old home I had left over 20 years before. It was late winter. As we drew near my former home, the day became overcast, and a cold wind blew into the cabin of our boat. While all one could see through the chinks in our bamboo awning were a few desolate villages, void of any sign of life, scattered far and near under the somber yellow sky. I could not help feeling depressed. Surely this was not the old home I had remembered for the past 20 years. The old home I remembered was not in the least like this. My old home was much better. But if you asked me to recall its peculiar charm or describe its beauties, I had no clear impression, no words to describe it. And now it seemed this was all there was to it. Then I rationalized the matter to myself, saying, home was always like this, and although it has not improved, still it is not so depressing as I imagine. It is only my mood that has changed, because I am coming back to the country this time with no illusions. This time I had come with the sole object of saying goodbye. The old house our clan had lived in for so many years had already been sold to another family, and was to change hands before the end of the year. I had to hurry there before New Year's Day to say goodbye forever to the familiar old house, and to move my family to another place where I was working, far from my old hometown. At dawn on the second day I reached the gateway of my home. Broken stems of withered grass on the roof, trembling in the wind, made very clear the reason why this old house could not avoid changing hands. Several branches of our clan had probably already moved away, so it was unusually quiet. By the time I reached the house, my mother was already at the door to welcome me, and my 8-year-old nephew, hsun, rushed out after her. Though Mother was delighted, she was also trying to hide a certain feeling of sadness. She told me to sit down and rest and have some tea, letting the removal wait for the time being. hsun, who had never seen me before, stood watching me at a distance. But finally we had to talk about the removal. I said that rooms had already been rented elsewhere, and I had bought a little furniture. In addition, it would be necessary to sell all the furniture in the house in order to buy more things. Mother agreed, saying that the luggage was nearly all packed, and about half the furniture that could not easily be moved had already been sold. Only it was difficult to get people to pay up. "You must rest for a day or two and call on our relatives, and then we can go," said Mother. "Yes. Then there is Juntu. Each time he comes here, he always asks after you, and wants very much to see you again. I told him the probable date of your return home, and he may be coming any time." At this point, a strange picture suddenly flashed into my mind. A golden moon suspended in a deep blue sky, and beneath it the seashore, planted as far as the eye could see with jade-green watermelons, while in their midst a boy of 11 or 12, wearing a silver necklet and grasping a steel pitchfork in his hand, was thrusting with all his might at a jah, which dodged the blow and escaped between his legs. This boy was Juntu. When I first met him he was just over 10. That was 30 years ago, and at that time my father was still alive and the family well off, so I was really a spoilt child. That year it was our family's turn to take charge of a big ancestral sacrifice, which came round only once in 30 years, and hence was an important one. In the first month the ancestral images were presented, and offerings made, and since the sacrificial vessels were very fine, and there was such a crowd of worshippers, it was necessary to guard against theft. Our family had only one part-time laborer. In our district we divide laborers into 3 classes. Those who work all the year for one family are called full-timers. Those who are hired by the day are called dailies, and those who farm their own land and only work for one family at New Year, during festivals or when rents are being collected, are called part-timers. And since there was so much to be done, he told my father that he would send for his son Juntu to look after the sacrificial vessels. When my father gave his consent, I was overjoyed, because I had long since heard of Juntu, and knew that he was about my own age, born in the intercalary month. And when his horoscope was told, it was found that of the 5 elements, that of earth was lacking. So his father called him Juntu, intercalary earth. He could set traps and catch small birds. I looked forward every day to New Year, for New Year would bring Juntu. At last, when the end of the year came, one day Mother told me that Juntu had come, and I flew to see him. He was standing in the kitchen. He had a round, crimson face, and wore a small felt cap on his head, and a gleaming silver necklet round his neck, showing that his father doted on him, and, fearing he might die, had made a pledge with the gods and Buddhas, using the necklet as a talisman. He was very shy, and I was the only person he was not afraid of. When there was no one else there, he would talk with me. So in a few hours we were fast friends. I don't know what we talked of then, but I remember that Juntu was in high spirits, saying that since he had come to town, he had seen many new things. The next day I wanted him to catch birds. "Can't be done," he said. "It's only possible after a heavy snowfall. On our sands, after it snows, I sweep clear a patch of ground, prop up a big threshing basket with a short stick, and scatter husks of grain beneath. When the birds come there to eat, I tug a string tied to the stick, and the birds are caught in the basket. There are all kinds, wild pheasants, woodcocks, wood-pigeons, bluebacks." Accordingly, I looked forward very eagerly to snow. "Just now it is too cold," said Juntu another time. "But you must come to our place in summer. In the daytime we'll go to the seashore to look for shells. There are green ones and red ones, besides scared devil shells and Buddha's hands. In the evening, when Dad and I go to see the watermelons, you shall come too." "Is it to look out for thieves?" "No. If passers-by are thirsty and pick a watermelon, folk down our way don't consider it as stealing. What we have to look out for are badgers, hedgehogs, and jaw. When under the moonlight you hear the crunching sound made by the jaw when it bites the melons, then you take your pitchfork and creep stealthily over—" I had no idea then what this thing called jaw was, and I am not much clearer now for that matter. But somehow I felt it was something like a small dog, and very fierce. "Don't they bite people?" "You have a pitchfork. You go across, and when you see it, you strike. It's a very cunning creature, and will rush towards you and get away between your legs. Its fur is as slippery as oil." I had never known that all these strange things existed. At the seashore there were shells all colors of the rainbow. Watermelons were exposed to such danger. Yet all I had known of them before was that they were sold in the greengrocers. On our shore, when the tide comes in, there are lots of jumping fish, each with 2 legs like a frog. Juntu's mind was a treasure house of such strange lore, all of it outside the ken of my former friends. They were ignorant of all these things, and, while Juntu lived by the sea, they, like me, could see only the 4 corners of the sky above the high courtyard wall. Unfortunately, a month after New Year, Juntu had to go home. I burst into tears, and he took refuge in the kitchen, crying and refusing to come out, until finally his father carried him off. Later he sent me by his father a packet of shells and a few very beautiful feathers, and I sent him presents once or twice, but we never saw each other again. Now that my mother mentioned him, this childhood memory sprang into life like a flash of lightning, and I seemed to see my beautiful old home, so I answered, "Fine. And he? How is he?" "He's not at all well off, either," said Mother. And then, looking out of the door, "Here come those people again. They say they want to buy our furniture, but actually they just want to see what they can pick up. I must go and watch them." Mother stood up and went out. The voices of several women could be heard outside. I called Hung to me and started talking to him, asking him whether he could write, and whether he would be glad to leave. "Shall we be going by train?" "Yes, we shall go by train." "And boat?" "We shall take a boat first." "Oh, like this, with such a long mustache!" A strange, shrill voice suddenly rang out. I looked up with a start and saw a woman of about 50 with prominent cheekbones and thin lips. With her hands on her hips, not wearing a skirt but with her trousered legs apart, she stood in front of me, just like the compass in a box of geometrical instruments. I was flabbergasted. "Don't you know me? Why, I have held you in my arms!" I felt even more flabbergasted. Fortunately, my mother came in just then and said, "He has been away so long. You must excuse him for forgetting. You should remember," she said to me. "This is Mrs. Yang from across the road. She has a bean-curd shop." Then, to be sure, I remembered. When I was a child, there was a Mrs. Yang who used to sit nearly all day long in the bean-curd shop across the road, and everybody used to call her Bean-Curd Beauty. She used to powder herself, and her cheekbones were not so prominent then, nor her lips so thin. Moreover, she remained seated all the time, so that I had never noticed this resemblance to a compass. In those days people said that, thanks to her, that bean-curd shop did very good business, but probably on account of my age she had made no impression on me, so that later I forgot her entirely. However, the compass was extremely indignant, and looked at me most contemptuously, just as one might look at a Frenchman who had never heard of Napoleon, or an American who had never heard of Washington, and smiling sarcastically she said, "You had forgotten? Naturally, I am beneath your notice." "Certainly not, I answered nervously, getting to my feet. "Then you listen to me, Master Hsun. You have grown rich, and they are too heavy to move, so you can't possibly want these old pieces of furniture any more. You had better let me take them away. Poor people like us can do with them." "I haven't grown rich. I must sell these in order to buy—" "Oh, come now! You have been made the intendant of a circuit. How can you still say you're not rich? You have 3 concubines now, and whenever you go out, it is in a big sedan chair with 8 bearers. Do you still say you're not rich? Ha! You can't hide anything from me." Knowing there was nothing I could say, I remained silent. "Come now, really. The more money people have, the more miserly they get, and the more miserly they are, the more money they get," remarked the compass, turning indignantly away and walking slowly off, casually picking up a pair of Mother's gloves and stuffing them into her pocket as she went out. After this, a number of relatives in the neighborhood came to call. In the intervals between entertaining them, I did some packing, and so 3 or 4 days passed. One very cold afternoon I sat drinking tea after lunch when I was aware of someone coming in, and turned my head to see who it was. At the first glance I gave an involuntary start, hastily stood up, and went over to welcome him. The newcomer was Juntu, but although I knew at a glance that this was Juntu, it was not the Juntu I remembered. He had grown to twice his former size. His round face, once crimson, had become sallow and acquired deep lines and wrinkles. His eyes, too, had become like his father's, the rims swollen and red, a feature common to most peasants who work by the sea and are exposed all day to the wind from the ocean. He wore a shabby felt cap and just one very thin padded jacket, with the result that he was shivering from head to foot. He carried a paper package and a long pipe. Nor was his hand the plump red hand I remembered, but coarse and clumsy and chapped, like the bark of a pine tree.